start learning if you're going to do something in the city. Capitalism, in the simplest definition, in the 1500s, it says learning, acquiring, own, and control the land, the tools, the resources, and use other people's labor to enrich yourself. That's what capitalism is. I'm going to tell it to you again. It means learn how to acquire and control and own the land, the resources and tools, and use other people's labor to enrich yourself. That's capitalism. Now, W.D. Du Bois defined it a little different in 1915. He said that capitalism is like having 3 to 4 years of corn. You eat one, you save one, you sell one, and you save the seeds for next year's planting. That's capitalism. Now, in neither of those definitions did any of y'all hear me, and correct me if you heard it. I didn't mention anything about civil rights and social integration. I said it's learning how to acquire wealth, tools, resources, and enrich yourself off of it. But what has happened now in the black community is through impediments is that we've been bamboozled by a lot of the black leadership in this country to having black folk focus strictly on civil rights and social integration. Social integration has failed in this country for black folk. It's the worst thing that ever happened to black folk. Black folk went backwards with social integration. What black folk lost almost everything they had during the process of social integration. Before integration came, and most of my white friends, and again when I say white friends, see I got white relatives, y'all might not know that. And see they jump on me all the time, but you know, quit saying those things about us. We're not part of that. But I got half my family want to pass a white, I go on fine, do it. But see, but social integration is a diluting process. It's a watering down process. And before integration, black people in America had their own businesses. They had their own communities. They had their own schools and churches. They had their, as a matter of fact, in the Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where I grew up, my family was one of the families that was a part owner of a 4-family operation. We owned the only black bus line in America, the only one they've ever had. When I say a bus line, I'm not talking about 3 or 4 buses or 10 or 15 buses. We had over 500 buses. We didn't service just the black neighborhood. We serviced the white neighborhoods too. It was called a Safe Bus Company in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We took care of the city bus services. In Winston-Salem, the black community also had 2 cab companies. Why? Because the white community had 2 cab companies. The white community had the Bluebird and the Yellow cabs. Blacks, we had the Harris cab and the Kansas City cabs. We had our own movie theaters, the Lincoln and Lafayette theaters. They had theirs, the Hollywood, the North Carolina theaters, the state theaters. We had our own restaurants and shoe shops and clothing stores and everything. We lost all of that. We even had our own movie theaters. We had the Lincoln and Lafayette theaters. In every city in the United States, blacks had the 2 movie theaters, the Lincoln and Lafayette theaters. We had movie producing studios, Norman Productions down in Jacksonville, Florida, Rishaw in Chicago, and Hollywood Production, making our own movies. They weren't the best movies, but they were ours. But see, when integration came, it took away everything from us. And unfortunately, it wasn't because it was a conspiracy of whites to do that. It wasn't the whites that did that. It was the NAACP. Now, don't go blaming whites for that. Whites didn't jump up this idea about let's go out and force blacks into integration. You see, when down in McLaren, South Carolina, where I used to live, in McLaren, South Carolina, they filed an original lawsuit, became the desegregation decision in 1954. They weren't filing for social integration. They filed it because the black kids were walking to school every day and the white kids were riding on buses. And in my school, in elementary school, we had to spend the first week every year of school cleaning up the old books. The white schools would send all the old books over to our school. We had to clean them and fix them up and take gum erase and get all the dirt and trash off and put tape on them. We got all their hand-me-downs of everything, for equipment, tools, everything. And so when Clinton, South Carolina filed a lawsuit, they filed it based on what? Money, economics. They're saying it's not right. We don't want. They've been talking about social integration. The city and the state county was paying what? $1 for every black child to go to school and $11 for every white child to go to school. And that's where the problem came from. It was a maldistribution of the resources and the money. And so in 1970, Governor Reuben Askew, who's a good old Southern who I love to death, Reuben called me down and said, Dr. Anderson, would you come down here and run my schools, run the state system? I became the coordinator of education for the state of Florida from 1970 to 1976, right at the time of desegregation. And I went to the Department of Education and I said, look, what are y'all going to do on the desegregation decision? They said, well, what we're going to do, here's our plan. We're going to fire the black teachers, fire the black counselors, fire the black administrators, close all the black schools, bus 75% of the black kids to the white schools, and put the rest in special education classes. I said, no, you're not going to do that. They said, why not? I said, I don't want you to bust the kids. I want you to bust the money and the resources. Leave the black neighborhood, the black schools alone, and bust the resources over there. Give them some tennis courts. Give them some swimming pools. Give them some of the best teachers and best books and learning materials. But again, I got overruled in that by the state legislature. They said the easiest thing for them, they could save money by just letting blacks become guests, G-U-E-S-T, in the white schools. And so consequently, that didn't work. And so we had impediments because our civil rights leaders got bamboozled with that policy in 1867. Then by 1968, it came up again. President Nixon then when he got elected to office, he got a letter from Daniel Moynihan saying, I got a way to shut down the black civil rights movement in the country and shut down the black power movement. He said, what you do, you take the focus in public policy off of black folk and never put it back again. You place it on minority women and immigrants. And so at that point, I was opposed to that, but that's what they did. They shifted the focus, and they call that a benign neglect policy, which means that don't say anything mean about black folk, just pretend that they don't exist. And then they come up with this whole concept called post-racism and a colorblind society, and say the Constitution is colorblind. The Constitution was never colorblind. The Constitution is always very specific, saying you all are going to be slaves, and you all can be owners. The Constitution was never colorblind. And the American dream, what you hear about all the time, was based on anybody coming from Europe. They were advertising all over Europe, come to America and we give you free land and free labor. And they set up a franchising system to make sure anybody came to America can get free land and free labor. Black folk, again, were not in the system. They were underneath the system. They never got the free land. They never got free labor. They were the labor force. And so by 1960, when Moynihan's memo went out, blacks were an obsolete, abandoned labor class. Our black civil rights leaders bought into the concept of focusing now not on black folk, but on minority, women and children, people of color, multicultural, diversity, anything other than black folk. Now it's moved over to gay and transsexuals. Now I have the dubious honor again. I wrote the first affirmative action plan in the United States. I wrote that in 1970. I wrote it for the state of Florida, approved by Governor Askew and the state cabinet. I didn't write the affirmative action program for everybody. And if I were a white male right now, I'll be mad as hell, because the affirmative action plan was not written for everybody. It was written for black people. It was written for a very specific reason. It was written to be corrective action, correcting something that the government has systematically done to handicap, exploit, misuse, enslave, and beat up on a specific group of people and deny them access to resources. But the Moynihan memo, with a lot of our civil rights leaders supporting it, switched it away from black folk and switched it to everybody can now be called a minority, and everybody entitled to the same benefits. If you're an immigrant that ran across the border last night, you're entitled to the benefits. That's not what it was designed for. Nobody, they use these broad, ambiguous terms. Minority. What is a minority? Nobody knows. Is that a one-legged man, a blind piano player? What's a minority? Nobody knows. Nobody knows what a minority is. Nobody knows what a people of color is. So when they moved into all these broad languages that you cannot measure, you can't identify, doesn't mean anything. And see, if I were a white male right now, I would go get into a minority program. You know why? Because the white male is one of the biggest minorities in the country. He's entitled to go into every minority program you got and get what he needs out of it. We had a Pakistani came up to Washington, D.C. The University of Maryland did the same thing. He was a Pakistani. He went through Africa and came into the United States, and he said he was an African American. The scholarship program was set up for African Americans. He says, I'm an African American. I left Africa and now I'm in America. And he's absolutely right. And all my white friends right here, over here, all of these are African Americans. You know why? Because the first human beings on earth were in Africa. All people radiated out of Africa. Every white person is an African American if he lives in America. He's got African blood in him. It might be go back quite a distance, and a lot of us even closer than that back in the 1880s. So everybody's an African American. Nobody knows what it is. You can't measure it. And so when we get through the civil rights movement, they ask themselves, blacks, what do y'all want? What are you marching for? What do you want? And our civil rights leaders incompetently said, we want something that we can't measure. We want equal opportunity. And so the white community says, Abracadabra, you got it. What else do y'all want? They say, well, we want equality. They say, abracadabra, you got it. They said, what else do you want? We want freedom. They said, abracadabra, you got it. Now get the hell out of here and don't come back anymore. They didn't get anything. The civil rights movement got nothing. And every time they got a march, they're marching to Washington, you can ask them, what is it that you're